To be fair, his name is Ash Ketchum, so he should be able to catch them all.
Oh my god. I never got that.
You didn't? I thought that was the whole basis of Ash's character.
Oh my god.
Oh, Catherine's deeply ashamed.
You have to kill me now.
Oh no.
Oh, I have to die.
Oh no, you have to die. Hi, I'm Kylie Spillman.
I'm Catherine Johnson.
I'm Robin Kopic, and you're listening to Grow Up, a Saturday morning podcast for nostalgic millennials, where we revisit some of the favorite stories of our collective childhoods.
Deconstruct them with our full-fledged adult brain holes.
And probably do other things because I'm hungover, which makes me emotionally unhinged. For this inaugural episode of Grow Up, we decided to watch the first 5 ever episodes of Pokemon Indigo League. So, to start things off on a serious note, we've been assigned the task of each finding a Pokemon joke for a battle of wits. Robin, I know how enthusiastic you were, so I believe you should go first.
Wait, I'm sorry, what was your justification for making me go first?
Because
I would like
you're
to contest
really,
it, but I don't know what it is.
You wrote me last night about how excited you were to do this.
I googled this joke, and I think it's one of the most mediocre jokes I've ever heard.
Oh my
Which is
god.
why I'm telling it. Why did the Lapras cross the road?
I don't know.
Why?
To get to the other tide.
That sucks.
I nominate Kylie next.
All right. I would love to go next.
Let's hear it.
Since I was the only one who got a joke in advance.
Hey.
What do you call it when a haunter gets too close to a campfire?
Oh no.
What?
What?
A toasty ghosty.
Oh my god, I hate you. I physically detest you.
I love that.
I thought you might.
I love that. Okay, my turn.
Your turn.
What do you call Pokemon droppings?
Oh no.
Peekapoo.
Oh my god.
Oh god.
I think Kylie's one.
You do?
That is in my
But it
opinion,
didn't have
the
any
Toasty
fecal
Ghosty
jokes.
was better than the
Robin's
Peekapoo.
voting for the toasty ghosty.
Okay, I vote for it too.
Yes, I won with the toasty ghosty.
Unanimous victory for Kylie.
We wanted to work on a franchise with a lot of nostalgic value that spans across like the vastness that is the millennial experience. And in fact, Pokemon is the second highest grossing video game franchise in the world, second only to the Mario franchise. Did you guys...
Nintendo killing it.
I know, right? And although it's rare to come across a millennial who's entirely unfamiliar with the social phenomenon that Pokemon became, I'd like to start with just a little bit of context. So Pokemon is short for Pocket Monsters. Actually began as a video game franchise created in Japan by Satoshi Tajiri in 1996. And the basic premise of the games was that humans, called Pokemon trainers, could catch, train, and battle Pokemon for sport. Later, it was expanded into manga comics, and then it was so popular that only 1 year later it became an animated series, Pokemon Indigo League. And that took off, stealing the hearts of millions of children all around the world. The card game was marketed for younger children, but it became a game for all ages when Pokemon tournaments became a thing in gaming circles. This whole story begins with a young boy, a 10-year-old boy named Ash, who wants to be a Pokemon trainer. Ash begins as any 10-year-old boy would, way too excited to go to sleep the night before his induction into the Pokemon Training Society. But in his sleep, while he's dreaming about training his possible Pokemon, he mistakes his alarm clock for a Pokeball and throws it across the room, which it smashes against the wall.
Fatal error number one,
exactly.
Throwing his alarm clock at the wall.
That's really the error that started it all. I mean,
It just sets Ash up to be somebody who makes errors constantly.
Right.
And not just not just the fact that he makes errors, they happen because of his personality, because of who he is and what he's like. He is so anxious about being the best, about getting his first Pokemon, that he is having these fever dreams, and he's so distracted by his dreams because he's so excited. He kind of just, the mistake stems from that anxiety, that excitement. It's in a way his own fault, his own doing.
It's worth noting as well that Ash's father is not in the picture, and that Ash's father left to also become a Pokemon trainer, and we haven't heard from him since, it seems.
I don't think that was worth noting.
I think it is, because it really speaks to...
I'm kidding.
It speaks to Ash's determination, because he wants... there's something in him that really wants to be either like his father or better than his father. And this sets off a series of events. Ash oversleeps, he is late to pick up his first Pokemon from Professor Oak, and then he ends up with the only Pokemon that is left. This is a Pikachu, an electric-type mouse Pokemon, even though in the manga, Pikachu was not Ash's original companion. Did you know that, Kether?
That's stupid.
Do you know who was?
You say that, but wait until you hear who it was, because
Clefairy,
I am personally a big
Clefairy.
fan.
Yeah, that's
I
silly.
love that. I wish.
Ash tries to look on the bright side, and he, embraces his new Pokemon, but Pikachu's kind of an antisocial little creature and electrocutes the shit out of him. And together they come across a couple of Pokemon, but Pikachu refuses to battle, and Ash tries to catch this Pokemon, the Pidgey, but he fails. Finally fed up, Ash throws a rock at what he thinks is a Pidgey, only to find out that he has now pissed off a Spearow, which is a much more dangerous type of bird Pokemon that travels in packs. Spearow calls for help from its flock, and tens of Spearows chase Ash and Pikachu over a waterfall.
Tens of thousands.
And this is when we meet Misty. Ash steals her bicycle and races his wounded Pokemon towards this hospital, right? But the Spearows are still hot on their tail, and Ash crashes the bike, but when Ash places himself between the approaching horde of Spearows and the wounded Pokemon, Pikachu rewards his selflessness by mustering his last bit of strength and electrocuting all of the Spearows in his signature move, which is Thunder Shock. As the thunderstorm lets up, Ash looks up into the sky and he sees a Pokemon that his Pokédex cannot actually identify, and he learns that there are unidentified Pokemon in this world that trainers have never been able to catch.
Okay, here's another thing that I really wanted to talk about, because I didn't notice this until I actually explicitly made this list. Every single new person that Ash meets is mad at him.
Yeah!
Every single one.
So cool.
And because, okay, first he knows his mother and he knows Professor Oak.
Right.
But even Professor Oak, who he already knows, is kind of he's not angry, but he's just
He's shitty.
You're late again, you dumb kid. But
Yeah.
even before he sees Oak, the first person he meets is Gary. And Gary, he runs into Gary. Gary is angry and contemptuous. He's like, you didn't get here in time. You are so late,
You're
you
in
little
your
kid. But also,
pajamas.
he bumps into Gary. So the very first thing that comes out of Gary's mouth is basically hey, watch where you're going, kid. And that's his rival from there on out. He ran into him. He got a cool Pokemon and
Though maybe this is worth discussion.
but it starts with that.
Has Ash met Gary before?
No, I think that's the first time, because he tells him his name. They introduce each other.
I was under
At
the
that point,
impression
I'm Gary,
that
he says.
in the world of Pokemon, everyone just announces who they are every time they walk into a room.
You know who doesn't do that? Misty never does that.
Who? Misty? I have a theory that Misty is not real.
Ooh, tell me
Misty's a
about that.
ghost.
I just kind of noticed while Ash is training his Pokemon, I feel like Misty is training Ash, and I'm like, Misty, are you a ghost of the just collective consciousness of trainers that has come down to train Ash?
That's interesting.
I am convinced of it.
I'm not quite convinced, but I would love to listen to that.
And then Misty, the first thing that she thinks she's catching a big fish, and then it's just a kid.
Fish.
But then she yells at him. She's mad at him.
Why are you not a fish?
But then she sees his Pokemon and she melts, and she's like, oh,
Right, exactly. So she she's mad at Ash, but she sees his Pokemon and sort of immediately becomes sympathetic to him.
Not to Ash,
and
but
she's
to
like,
Pokemon.
you need to... Or right, to Pikachu. And she's like, you need to take your Pokemon to the Poke Center. He's like, okay, great. And steals her bike. And then obviously she's mad at him again.
Yeah, because she's a ghost.
And so he's on his way to the Poke Center. I think episode 2, it starts off with Officer Jenny giving an announcement about thieves in her town. Then she sees Ash running. And the first thing out of her mouth is literally, speak of the devil. And...
the devil, Ash Ketchum.
And then she's like yelling at him, and she's angry at him and confronting him. And then she sees that he has a Pokemon that's wounded, and she's immediately sympathetic. So it's kind of like Misty. People are mad at Ash, but they see his Pokemon, and they are immediately sympathetic of the Pokemon. Yeah. They take him to the Poke Center, where there's a person whose name is Joy. Her name is literally Joy. She is one of the happiest characters in the entire series. One of the most loving and sympathetic people. And the first emotion out of her is anger. She's yelling at Ash for being irresponsible towards his Pokemon. Not a single person meets Ash without being mad at him. It's just the natural reaction.
I have a few more notes about Gary I want to talk about. I'm obsessed with Gary. Because I fucking hate Gary so much. And he is such a big part of the show, but I realize you only see him in one scene in these 5 episodes. And it's just him being like, I'm Gary Oak, and I'm going to be the greatest Pokemon trainer in the world. And he does this giant speech, and then after that, Ash makes that same speech so many times. In the same episode, when he's being faced down by all the Spearow, he makes the same speech as Gary, and it's the first we hear Ash saying those things like, I'm the greatest boy ever, and I've got a Pikachu, and check me the fuck out. And it's like Gary planted this seed in Ash and is like creating Ash. And he's this specter over everything he does, because we never see him again, but all we get is like little references to, like, you know, he's the last kid from Pallet to get to Viridian City.
I think Gary is a really interesting foil to Ash, because we do only see him the one time.
But he's ever present.
But everything else we hear about him is like hearsay. But we never really kind of get to see Gary's relationship with his Pokemon, and I think it's pretty safe to assume that he doesn't have a very strong relationship with his Pokemon, because people like Gary tend to treat their Pokemon like commodities as opposed to sentient creatures.
Yeah,
for sure. It's like when Professor Oak was, saying like, oh, I made a bet with Gary, like the question was, how many Pokemon did you catch? Instead of like, how
and it
is
wasn't
your
about like,
relationship
did you make your Pikachu happy with you? Did you ever get him into a Pokeball? Like, it was never about how Ash was relating to his Pokemon. It was all about the number of Pokemon
the beautiful
that he
transformative moment you had with your Pikachu. And like, no, it's like, how many Pokemon are you at? It's like, we don't actually.
He's like,
live
I
in a
only
video
have
game.
Pikachu. Nurse Joy accepts her new patient and sends him into critical care, but she reprimands Ash for letting Pikachu get that hurt. Misty catches up with Ash in the waiting room, still hauling her bike, and demands that he replace it. An alarm goes off in the Pokemon Center, indicating that an aircraft containing Pokemon thieves was seen hovering over the Pokemon Center. And this is the first time we meet Team Rocket. Jessie, James, and Meowth. But just in time, a horde of Pikachus dive on top of their injured companion, charging him with electrical energy. And with this extra power, Pikachu defeats Team Rocket. But no, they realize that Ash's Pikachu is no ordinary Pikachu, and they vow to come back for him, and they flee the Pokemon Center.
Excuse me, they don't flee, they blast off again.
They do. They blast off at the speed of light. Surrender now.
Semantics, Kyle.
Then Ash and Misty go to the Viridian Forest together, where they encounter a Caterpie. Ash hurls his empty Pokeball at this low-level Caterpie, and he catches it, and he celebrates his first win. But they are interrupted by Team Rocket. They demand that they hand over Pikachu, but Ash refuses, so Jessie and James summon their Pokemon, Ekans and Coughing, for a battle. He then summons Caterpie, but Caterpie actually defeats them. And Misty, in an attempt to overcome her fear, tries to reward Caterpie with a little pat on the head for a job well done. But then Caterpie evolves into Metapod, a hard cocoon of a bug-like Pokemon. Encouraged by his success, Ash leads his way deeper into the forest.
But the point that I was going to make is the value that Pokemon have in terms of human relationships. They are the bridge that connects humans who have no sympathetic quality. It's people who would have no reason to like each other. For instance, Misty hating Ash right away. I mean, she's mad at him. She automatically doesn't like him, but she automatically likes Pikachu, and that's what bonds them together. It's because of Pikachu that they become friends. It's because of the Pokemon in their life that they are able to connect with each other. And same with, even the Caterpie, who Misty automatically dislikes. And that becomes a point of contention between Ash and Misty. That's another personality conflict, but through the that episode and as the Caterpie fights and does his best to protect Ash or to win in the fight, and as they go through all of these things and it becomes a Metapod and then Butterfree, or right before it becomes a Metapod, Misty finally sort of becomes okay with the Caterpie. And she is almost, Ash even says it evolves, and then Ash says, I believe you were about to say something friendly towards the Caterpie. And so even though the Caterpie itself being a bug Pokemon was the point of contention to begin with, the emotional journey that it took them on brought them closer together. And she was able to overcome something, a fear of her own, a bias of her own, because of this Pokemon. And not because of Ash, but now her and Ash are closer than ever. And it's just another step that brings them together on their journey of friendship.
While engaged in another battle between his Pidgeotto and a Weedle, looking for the quote-unquote trainer from Pallet Town, the battle devolves into a proverbial pissing contest, Metapod versus Metapod, doing nothing more than this defensive mood called Harden. Then a swarm of Beedrill approach and steal Ash's Metapod, while the samurai flees with his own. Ash, in the meantime, rescues Metapod. He apologizes for leaving Metapod behind. Metapod then evolves into Butterfree.
So are you guys familiar with the Jungian idea of ego death or psychic death?
Yes.
Ooh, no, tell us about that.
So
tell the listeners about that.
Yeah. There's a lot of different versions of it, and some of it has a lot to do with psychedelics and stuff, but in Jungian psychology, it's a complete loss of subjective self-identity. Ego death is a phase of self-surrender and transition, a fundamental transformation of the psyche. So when I was reading about that, I was just thinking about Ash, because I feel like every episode he has this moment where he should transition and he should become this stronger person. And yet he kind of goes through this same cycle every single episode. We were kind of talking about that, where he starts out really enthusiastic and then something just terrible happens to him. And I just don't feel like he's learning from it. Did you guys notice that in these 5?
He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't learn from...
He doesn't seem to learn. Really stubborn. Mm-hmm. So he's not having his transition or ego death. And I also thought that applies a lot to Pokemon that are actually evolving, where they're completely changing their state of being.
That's really interesting, because what is it that triggers Caterpie's evolution? It's the fact that Misty reaches out to pat him on the head, and suddenly he just looks up and evolves. Yeah.
He feels love for the first time.
He feels love from Misty, who for some reason means a lot to him instantly.
Yeah. And so episode 4, the samurai, which I was so not looking forward to. I don't know why. I just thought it looked so stupid. And then I ended up loving it. Because it has that... It has that fight where we see a little bit of Ash actually becoming a good trainer, where he's fighting Pinsir with his Metapod, and everyone's like, what are you doing, you dumb idiot? No one fights the Metapod. You just put it out at the beginning of the battle, then you pull it back so it gets points and it evolves later on in the video game. But he thinks ahead to, like, Pinsir chopping Metapod in half, and he has the foresight to be like, Metapod harden, and he, like, breaks Pinsir's, like, horn things. His pincers. He
breaks Pinsir's pincers.
So what is he now? He doesn't even have a name. The samurai's like, I know just what to do. Here's my Metapod. And so they're just 2 Metapods sitting there. And they just keep yelling, harden, harden, harden. And then to the point that Misty's sitting there with, like, a margarita watching, which I thought was amazing. And it's seared in my memory forever. And so the whole episode is just about, like, him being so stupid and stubborn. And then when his Metapod gets taken, he blames the samurai. And then when they don't get Metapod back, he keeps blaming everyone else but himself. And he gets in this big fight with Samurai. Samurai's like, you left your Pokemon behind. Like, he doesn't mean anything to you. And he's like, no, it was you. It's not my fault. I did everything. And then finally, when he gets Metapod back and Metapod's mad at him, and he's like, it wasn't my fault, it was everyone else's fault. And then he just stops and he's like, he trips and says, like, you know what? It was all my fault and I'm not going to make any more excuses. And then that's when Metapod evolves into a butterfly. And so I thought, like, this is going to be this moment where Ash actually kind of changes. And because I thought this is symbolic of Ash's change he's going through, but I think more is just an allusion to what he can achieve someday, that he can be a beautiful butterfly too, because the very next episode he's, you know, electrocuting Pikachu so that he can get a badge, and it's like, just train, just Misty just offered to help you and she is your ghost mentor, just do it. And he's like, no, I want to super blast my Pikachu because this random homeless guy told me to. And God, he hasn't
something
changed
else
at
I think
all.
Is interesting is that, like, every time Misty keeps offering help, which is so generous, but she never gives him any context for the fact that, like, she is a valid helper. Because she is a Pokemon trainer, and she is
a gym leader.
One of 4 sisters. She's a gym leader. She's a strong Pokemon trainer with a nice little arsenal of Pokemon, and she never explains that to him, like, which she shouldn't have to. He immediately discounts her because she's a female.
Ghost.
I was going to say girl, but, you know, Ghost works also. A toasty little ghosty.
You're sitting there like, why doesn't she want to go be in the Pokemon League and do all this stuff? It's because after Ash took her bike, she died, and somehow, and now she's haunting Ash because he owes her a bike.
I don't know about that.
I
feel like her sisters would notice if she was dead.
She's bestowing otherworldly advice onto him and training him, and has, you know,
from beyond the grave. Okay, I'm curious then. What do you think killed Misty?
Wait. Ho-Oh has the power of resurrection. When Ho-Oh came over Ash, Ho-Oh resurrected Misty's spirit to guide him. Because Misty died somehow.
How did Misty die, though? She was just fishing, and then she was dead?
There was chaos for a second there. There was rain and Spearows. Like, who knows?
She got killed by all of them Spearows. Them Spearows killed her.
Yeah.
And then continued on looking for Ash.
Ho-Oh resurrected her to be Ash's guide. And she's haunting him.
I think that's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Ash and Misty make their way into Pewter City and come across a man named Flint. Ash visits the Pewter City gym and meets the gym leader, Brock. Brock summons his Onix, which is like this big rock-type Pokemon, and Ash uses Pikachu, unaware that rock-type Pokemon are largely immune to electricity. Ash has to surrender. Flint then brings Ash and Pikachu back to his cabin to rest, where Flint describes Brock's family life. We find out that Brock is the eldest brother of 11 siblings, and he is the only caretaker after their father left and their mother passed away. Flint then shows Ash a method with which to power up his Pikachu. Once Pikachu is supercharged, Ash returns to Pewter Gym and challenges Brock to one more match. So Pikachu takes the lead. In calling for the final blow against Onix, Brock's 10 little brothers and sisters grab hold of him and beg him to stop because they know that their brother loves his Pokemon so much. Ash orders Pikachu to return, vowing to beat Brock fair and square in the future. But Brock catches Ash on the way out, offering him his pewter badge nonetheless, because he both won the match and he was kind enough to spare Onix. This touching moment is interrupted by Flint, who takes off his disguise and reveals himself as Brock's father. Flint tells Brock to go out and seek his dreams with Ash. So they set off, Misty trailing behind, and that's where we are.
There's a very important detail, which is when Flint, like, takes all the stuff off his face, and Brock literally says, "My father," as if they aren't the exact same cartoon character. And he doesn't go like, "Dad," he goes, "My father."
My father! He does. And given that, I just kind of want to bring this up because I've been thinking a lot about this, about the ethical side of the Pokemon world, about what it means to be like, because it feels like Pokemon battling and like catching wild Pokemon and then training them feels like a form of animal cruelty in some ways. Like, not necessarily the way that Ash does it, but like taking wild animals from the wilderness, putting them in a confined space, and then making them fight each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
especially when we take into account the fact that Pokemon can eat other Pokemon.
Yeah.
And that humans also eat Pokemon.
That's definitely like something I'm thinking about as an adult rewatching it, and I don't know that I have an opinion yet. Like, I have to watch more. I'm like, please convince me that this is not
that this
I think
isn't
it is
animal
interesting
cruelty.
because, and this is not answered in the first 5 episodes, but it's something that comes up in the later episodes where Ash treats his Pokemon so differently from other people.
Yeah.
That kind of...
There's a lot more empathy in Ash's treatment of his Pokemon as opposed to other characters. Like, it's really Ash, Misty, and Brock who are very, very kind to
even within that group, Ash does things so differently from those other two. They are mystified by some of the things that he does. There's an episode, I think like episode 8 or so, where they are actually making fun of Ash because he is treating his Pokemon in an empathetic way.
I just shook my head at the dirty, dirty cheat bag, referencing episode 8.
But yeah, literally everybody, even his 2 closest friends, are actually making fun of him for treating a new Pokemon that he finds in an empathetic way instead of being hard on it and abusive to it or whatever. So that was like a really interesting...
And we will see very clear examples of like bad Pokemon trainers in the next couple of episodes. We're going to find examples of like really abusive Pokemon trainers.
Yeah.
And Ash is just like the furthest from that.
Yeah, he's pure of heart, which is why the Ho-Oh, because I went and I read everything about
shows
Ho-Oh.
Itself to him, because like that is the whole thing is like Ho-Oh only shows itself to people pure of heart.
Trainers pure of heart, yeah.
Yep.
And then nobody like believes him when he says he saw it. Like,
no,
Oak
even
just
Professor
shuts him
Oak.
down.
Especially Professor Oak. Professor Oak has too much experience. He's like, there's no way it would ever show up to you because I have never seen one.
Yeah.
There are trainers all over the world who have never seen such a thing.
Yeah.
You must be mistaken. And Ash is like, no.
My roommate, whenever he gets drunk, he's like, can you talk like Ash again? And I'm like, I'm Ash Ketchum. I'm the biggest Pokemon trainer ever. This is my Pikachu. He's never going to evolve because he's cute. That's my Ash impression.
That is really interesting as well. Like, we see so much character development within Pikachu, even within these first 5 episodes, but we know that Pikachu, like, never evolves.
Yeah.
He
oh my
remains
god,
Pikachu.
when Brock was like, oh, your Pikachu's very cute. He must be weak. And I'm like, Brock, you're cute too.
There is an episode not too far down the road where he contemplates evolving Pikachu and then decides...
Spoilers!
You bad cheater pants. No.
No, but you're right. You're right. He does for a minute in the future, although this is spoilers. He considers evolving Pikachu into Raichu, but he also knows that, like, he doesn't he like ask Pikachu if he wants to evolve?
Yes, he does.
He doesn't.
Or no, he
doesn't?
asks and Pikachu doesn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is interesting that he gave the choice to Pikachu, which is something I have a feeling somebody like Gary would not appreciate as a valid response.
Yeah, Gary's a dumbass.
Gary sucks.
You only know that one thing about Gary.
And yeah, but this thing with Ash and Gary, the fact that because I was just like, they're probably the same age. They're coming from the same middle of nowhere town. Why are they not friends? It's because Gary is a douchehole.
Yeah, that's correct.
Because we know that Ash can be like friends with anyone because everyone he meets hates him. And by the end of the episode, they're like, here, have a Pewter City badge, even though you didn't beat me. Can I come be your friend for the rest of this television series, even though we just met? Because I just noticed that this world, Pokemon world, is so obsessed with rules and timing, and Ash kind of exists outside of that. And so Gary is just kind of bursting through everything, where Gary is always the first one to get to every town, and follows all these rules and collects all these Pokemon. And it's all these things that when you're writing it down, it looks like he's the better trainer. This is what you should be doing. And even Professor Oak, is in that mindset where Ash tells him this amazing thing where he's like, I saw a legendary Pokemon. And he's like, no, you didn't. And then he goes on, he's like, oh, I made a bet with Gary about like how many Pokemon you'd catch, which is, this more quantifiable way of figuring out who's a good trainer.
Well, one, Gary and Professor Oak both know that Ash was late. So they already know that there is something not great with Ash's abilities, or perhaps even just like his commitment to the Pokemon training, as from their perspective anyway. And the fact that he shows up to Viridian City with no Pokemon really is kind of, I think Professor Oak has more faith in Ash than he probably should have. Because I think he sees something in Ash. I don't think he would have given him a Pikachu unless he thought he could handle it, because Pikachu are notoriously stubborn.
I thought it was very humorous, and I think it's intentionally done this way, but also it's a little bit dark and a little bit cynical how Professor Oak, in the giving of the Pokemon to Ash, doesn't even bother to... He's just like, I'm gonna let this kid be continuously disappointed. Because Ash picks up a Pokeball and he's says,
like, I've made my decision.
This one.
Squirtle!
And it's an empty Pokeball. And Oak is just like, oh yeah, somebody took that one already. So then Ash is like, okay, well, let me take this second one.
Well, Professor Oak just, like, one, he lets him do this, and two, after every empty Pokeball that he opens, he makes, like, this snide little comment about, like, he's like, well, that Squirtle was taken by somebody who didn't wake up late today.
Yeah.
And so that to me was just like a really... But so it's excitement and then disappointment, in this case, perpetual disappointment, as he finds out all 3 of the Pokemon
rapid fire
are not there.
It's just rapid fire of disappointment and excitement. Next, I suppose we should move into the personal statement. So what we plan on doing is one person on rotation is going to try to share a personal story that relates to the themes that have arisen in this section. And this week, it's me.
It's your turn.
Fairly unsurprisingly, I was a little bit of a tomboy as a kid. I had two very close friends. Both of them were boys.
Gross.
And they were the rough and tumble sort of boys. They were the kids that watched wrestling. They reenacted a lot of WWF and like to hit things with sticks, and they liked to use swear words like damn when our parents weren't listening.
How old were you?
Oh, this was a big deal because we were like 7.
Cheesy wheezy.
You were swearing when you were 7? I don't think I even knew what swear words were.
I wasn't. I was a goody two shoes, to an extent. And I found all of these. I thought that they were funny, and entertaining, but I never really got to fully engage into the little group because I, as the only girl, was never totally allowed to join in. Not entirely, anyway. This might have been because the boys' parents might have told them not to involve me because I was a girl and apparently would be like more likely to get hurt. But like the older I get, I wonder about that because even when I would join the existing scuffles, they would like suddenly come to a close. Anyways, whatever the reason, I was always kind of on the outside of our little relationship, and I assumed the role of the responsible young leader.
I didn't mean to laugh so loud at that.
You're a dick. I was the problem solver. I was the planner. I was the peacekeeper, and I was the one that made a lot of the decisions to go back and while the boys fought. I was the one that was forced to be responsible. So I wanted to share a little story. One time, my very good friend, whose name I will not share,
call him Bulbasaur.
Bulbasaur. I'm going to call him Bulbasaur. So Bulbasaur and my little brother Nick, whose name I don't actually mind sharing, started getting into a little tussle, and they were reenacting a wrestling fight that they had seen on WWF. And Bulbasaur picked my brother up, put him over his head, and threw him onto the grass. And I was the one that had to be like, Bulbasaur, no! I was the one that unfortunately had to be the tattletale. Because my little brother had been somehow in the lift. I guess Bulbasaur had grabbed hold of my brother's testicles when he threw him.
Jesus.
And he was in a lot of pain. So I had to bring my little brother into the house where my mother could treat his poor little testicles.
Bring this up next time I see him.
Anyways, how this relates. I often felt a lot like Misty. And in fact, watching the show growing up, I remember relating to Misty, even though back then I didn't have red hair. But I was like constantly being left behind or pushed aside, but then being expected to be the responsible one. And as we'll come to find out, Misty has a great deal more skill than Ash does, at least in the beginning. She has more Pokemon, and ultimately she has more training and experience. It's not because either of her travel companions make an effort to get to know her that she becomes a part of the group. It's kind of through brute force on her part that she asserts herself and she makes herself a part of it, regardless of whether or not the boys want her there.
Yeah. That was lovely.
In fact, Brock makes a point to be like, who's that strange girl that's following us? And Ash is like, let's walk faster.
She's a ghost!
She's a ghost. She's a toasty ghosty.
Toasty ghosty.
Next.
That was lovely.
Well, thank you.
And I look forward to Misty's feminist uprising.
Me too, because there's a lot of... Because Misty's the only girl we get to see on a regular basis, we get to interpret a lot of the story through a feminist lens through Misty's eyes. And so far what we've seen is Misty being pushed aside and Misty being left behind and Misty not being taken seriously, which I can speak for a lot of women when I say that that is the experience of a lot of women in the real world. Women are constantly pushed aside. Women are constantly being told that they're not enough or that they're
ghosts.
Somehow lesser. Yes, and ghosts for some reason. But next I would like to move on to our weekly question. Robin, would you like to read that?
Yeah, so assuming that, unlike Ash, you arrived on time to claim a Pokemon from Professor Oak, which of the 3 basic Pokemon would you have claimed and why?
And I would just like to preface this with, you can't choose Pikachu because we didn't know that Pikachu was an option at the beginning.
You can't be like, I would be the Avatar. I would be master of all 4 elements.
Yeah, you can't be like, I'm going to pick Pikachu or Clefairy or
show some humor.
Mewtwo.
I'm sorry, why are we taking Clefairy off the table again?
Because
Robin.
the 3 basic Pokemon are Charmander, Squirtle, and
Robin,
Bulbasaur.
you are being so ignorant.
I'm well aware. I already made my decision long before these things were said, and it is... I have my answer. I will give it to you next episode.
All right. So,
if it is
motherfucking
Clefairy, I am going to lose a nut.
I'm going to lose my fucking shit,
it's not. I already said
I'm going to lose my tiny testicles just like poor Nick. You've been listening to Grow Up, a Saturday morning podcast for nostalgic millennials with Katherine Johnson,
Robin Coffin,
and Kylie Spillman.
We'll be taking a break from Pokemon, but we'll hopefully get back to it in the future. As for next week, please join us as we watch the film classic, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
We would love to hear what you took away from the show and from this podcast. So if you heard something that resonated with you, or if you heard something that you don't think is quite right, please send us your thoughts at growthepodup@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter and send us your thoughts there, also at growthepodup. Complete with your name and the city you live in, and a little further down the line we may share those thoughts on the air.
This episode of Grow Up featured the song Enthusiast by the band Tour. If you enjoyed the episode, please comment, rate, or subscribe on whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts.